Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca for a slightly tired, little low energy weekly catch up on my reading, everything that I've read, everything that I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading for roughly the week. This has been a very, very busy weekend. So let's dive right into my week. So I read this week two things, one on audio, one on ebook, so I don't have anything to hold up. And the first that I finished was Pageboy, the memoir of Elliot Page, who is an actor, recently, in the past couple of years, very publicly transitioned, and is talking about the experiences of gender dysphoria, transition, and fame through this memoir. And I think it's such an introspective and internal look at what Page went through in life, and I think it's clear from the writing that truly every word on the page that made it there is very considered and thought through how to deliver this message of what he wants to say. And I just loved that aspect. So it is a very well written memoir, and that, I shouldn't say it surprised me, but I definitely went in expecting much more of the stereotypical famous person memoir. And it is that, but it's also really well written. So this memoir is not told linearly, which is typical of a memoir. It's told in anecdotes, and they're kind of arranged topically. I do think maybe that was the downfall of this for me. The one critique I would have is that it didn't feel necessarily like the topics cohered as much as they could have. And often, because of the time shifts and the lack of clear delineation, I had trouble telling at what phase of Elliot's life we were in, because very often we would be talking about something that was post-transition, and where he was at in his life at that point was completely jarring, because the next scene we would jump back to something in his teens or early childhood, and I would not be able to get like a frame of reference for where his mind was at and where like social expectations of him were at in what he was telling us. So I think that was like the one nitpick. Otherwise, it was a great book. I feel like I learned so much about Page's experience, and it was honestly kind of unusual in that from the trans experience, we often see these stories where a child begins to come out in childhood or begins questioning in childhood, and that's immediately squashed by parental expectations. And here, while he was kind of told, no, you can't be a boy, verbally, he was so much accepted in his experiences growing up for expressing himself the way that he wanted to. And so truly he was living out as a boy for the most part prior to transition in childhood. And then that got squashed only by his fame and the expectations of sort of stardom that were placed on him. So that's a really different story from other trans experiences that I've heard. And that's really a great reason to implore people to read a wide variety of trans experiences or listen to a wide variety of trans voices, because everyone's experience is so unique. So then getting into the fame aspect, I enjoyed those stories of kind of coming into fame, and it's not salacious, but we certainly do get details about how hard it was being a child actor. And coming recently off of having read I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, so many of those experiences were very similar, maybe for different reasons, but a lot of the experiences of exploitation of the child, of the pressures from the film industry on this child, were so present and so similar between those two stories that I had listened to, Jeanette McCurdy talking about going through a lot of the same things and seeing things swept under the rug that were clearly mistreatment of vulnerable actors and actresses who were underage. And here we get things like eating disorder at a young age. We don't get parental abuse in terms of the fame aspect. It seemed like Elliot's parents were very hands-off and just kind of okay with him making his own choices about this job that he wanted to do, or acting, the love of acting and performance. And they didn't put a lot of pressure on him, and that's cool to see a complete flip side again coming off of I'm Glad My Mom Died, because that was so different. But meanwhile, there were a lot of abuses within the film industry. People that mistreated Elliot sexually and physically, people that took advantage, people that even as he was an adult really mistreated him for any progress within his identity, both from a gender and sexuality perspective. Were really trying to keep him in a box. and within expectations. And I think that he did a great job of getting across how much that was steeped into the image that's put across for these people as they're coming into fame. They have to present in a certain way. So I think that was great at getting across the social roles. One of the things I enjoyed the most about this probably was that Elliot Page is super bookish. And I had not realized that. I knew he was a reader a bit, but I would not have expected the number of book references in here. It would be really cool for somebody to go through and read all of the books that he references, because they are littered throughout, or making friendships with people because they both love a book, developing crushes, that sort of thing really comes up prominently through this narrative. So I thought that was well laid out in terms of the personal interactions, the passions and hobbies that he loves, but through this all, it's about recognizing and respecting the identity of someone who has been through struggles, and many of them have been driven externally rather than internally. And that just reminds me back to my earlier point, how much having empathy and being accepting of people's desire to choose their own identity and present how they wish, simply being respectful of that is extremely important to our world and developing a caring society, really. And so I think that maybe that wasn't the intent or the purpose. It was just him getting across his story. But I think that bigger purpose comes across here and really hit home for me. If you are going into this, I would say it's a great book. Definitely check trigger warnings if you do have any triggers, because this has pretty much any. And there goes the tornado siren, so we get a monthly warning. Okay, I forgot what I was saying. Basically, just check your triggers if you have any, because this is full of every type of trigger. So the second thing I read was After the Dragons by Cynthia Zhang, and it was not what I expected at all. I don't really know what I expected, but it was very different. And the only thing I can even remotely liken it to is maybe Heartstrikers by Rachel Aaron, because that is also kind of a near future urban fantasy with dragons, and that one has high magic. I would say this one is pretty low on magic. And so they're slightly technologically advanced, but they have different problems, definitely. And here, it's got the urban fantasy aspects, but not the high action, no noir, nothing like that. This is more about relationships. And in this setting, we're in a future Beijing where there's been climate issues, and clearly that has ramped up to droughts. And we also have the element of these tiny dragons. They kind of remind me of cats, and specifically being involved with cat rescue and a lot of feral cat stuff. That really seemed familiar and similar here. So we have these dragons who have been kind of displaced sort of by drought. They are really dependent on water. We also have a sort of consumerist commentary in that these tiny dragons became popular as domestic pets, but people don't really know how to care for them and kind of abandon them when they realize they're too much work. And so there's this massive feral dragon population, basically. And we have our two protagonists, that's the catalyst for their meeting. We have Kai and Eli, and one of them is sort of very deeply entrenched in individual rescue for these dragons and has literally filled his house with these dragons to some degree, and is trying to do it all on his own. So we have that. It's not quite a grumpy sunshine, but we definitely have that kind of curmudgeonly sort that won't take help, and he's really avoidant to it. And the other is a scientist, a researcher who has access to a lab, and it becomes quickly apparent that there might be something beneficial in terms of a working relationship there between the lab and access to these dragons that the other is trying to rescue. And that forms into a budding romantic relationship. However, I would not at all call this a romance. There is a bit of romantic relationship there, but there's not very much like Twitterpation or romantic aspects to this. There is a romantic progression, but I think this would have been just as effective for the most part, even if it had just been a platonic relationship between them. So we do have that queer aspect of this being two men getting into a relationship. We also have a discovery aspect, that one of the characters clearly was kind of thought that was not something for him. Perhaps asexuality was in his mind. But as he's progressing into this attraction, he's realizing it's not used on the page, but demisexual is clearly what he's describing as his sort of attraction level. I loved the world building like so cool. I love the incorporation of the labs and science and the desire for a sort of symbiotic relationship that's not harmful to these dragons. And I thought that was fabulous. So this was really, really different from anything I've read before. It's very slow and considered. It's very much about culture, because there is a whole cultural element of one of these men, the researcher is actually coming from the US to rediscover, reconnect with some cultural heritage in Beijing. I like that aspect of self-discovery along with the kind of sexuality self-discovery. So that, I think, is very quiet and understated, though. It's not really played up as a major part of the story. It's just kind of background. And the relationship between the two is what is the strength of this story. It's so quiet as well. It's made over, you know, them having cups of tea together. Not in like the old-timey sense, but in the, you know, we're in China and we drink tea all the time sort of way, that they're just having tea around the clock. And that gives it a sense of coziness, even though there's not a lot of coziness to this. There's a huge amount of conflict between these two because, as I said, one of the guys is very resistant and very individualistic. We have the desire to not disclose personal information, not out of any rational reason, but because a self-protection sort of aspect. So there's angst and conflict to a significant degree, but it's not angst in the sense that it's high drama. It's angst in the sense that there's a certain pull between these two as they're trying to work through their own individuality toward something cohesive together. I thought the tension between the two was really well portrayed, and it didn't make it a really angsty romantic book. It's about human relationships and how complex those are. So I overall really enjoyed this one. I don't think it'll be too terribly memorable though, but I certainly had a great time with it. Interestingly, this is from the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize nominees last year, and I think it's a good fit for that. It definitely is very inventive and different. And it's also from a small press, Stelliform, who is a Canadian press. They've only got a few things out. I did check their catalog. They specifically focus on speculative fiction about climate and environment. And they have another book, despite their small catalog, on the list this year as well, Arboreality. And so that's really exciting and makes me intrigued to maybe check out the rest of their catalog, because to have two books on the prize list that is totally like working for me so far. I think I've only got 2 books left to read from the nominees last year, and I have loved everything really. So definitely interested to check out more of Stelliform. So that's it for what I read this week. What I'm reading this week is still the same. Immense World, I'm actually really close to finishing. It may not look like it, but I'm quite close. I think I've got less than a quarter left to go. Tess of the D'Urbervilles, still in progress and doing well. And I started Distant Gardens. This is a anthology edited by J.S. Fields and Heather Tracy. This is 10 short stories. So I read the first short story and quite enjoyed it. So that is everything that I am reading on an audiobook. I forgot about that. Our Hideous Progeny by C.E. McGill, I believe. So that's everything I'm reading. Now, onward to stuff I mentioned up front, tired, very, very exhausted from cramming in too much this week. I went from a festival to my D&D game and was so sweaty and gross because outdoors is too hot. It is normally quite hot, but not usually this hot. It was over 90 yesterday as I was running around, fortunately in a fairly shade-covered area, but man, it was rough. So that really sucks the energy out of you. If you've never been in a hot, humid climate, just spending time outside is very exhausting. So it is festival season though, so that means every day has been like very full on weekends, and even just looking at schedules for things, I was trying to look for the art fair later this month. I discovered there is another art fair that I didn't even know about that is happening this week. So all of that, I've got many appointments this week during the week, so it's going to be a very busy week. And then I'm planning for visitors later this month. I'm trying to get in stuff that I need to make reservations for ahead of time and buy tickets for it, that sort of thing. So that's my holiday weekend this weekend, because it is a 3-day Labor Day. I think Labor Day. I can't remember. It's one of those 3-day weekends in the US. So my 3-day weekend is very much being spent reading, going out doing a lot of stuff, and that's meaning I'm hopefully going to finish my BookTube Prize book, An Immense World, and get started on number 3 for the BookTube Prize's final round, because I need to get that all done and get in my votes submitted. What else has gone on? I did go see Barbie last weekend in terms of my watching stuff. I don't think I have any other like good finishes of shows, so Barbie was great. I have to warn you though, if you have not seen it, be prepared because the songs will get stuck in your head. I have probably listened to I'm Just Ken about 3 million times since I saw the movie. I love the soundtrack. It's fabulous, both the new songs and kind of the takes on older songs. The messaging, I think a lot of people have mixed responses to the messaging because some of it is very blunt and over the top. Below the surface, I think there is much more subtle and nuanced messaging in subtext that gets across like the really bigger messages that this is going for. And I think it did a great job of communicating empowerment for everyone. And I think that was fabulous. So really enjoyed it. I don't think I liked it as much as I thought I was going to, but it was a great movie. In recommendations this week, I want to loop kind of back to the Le Guin Prize, partially, because there is a group of booktubers who did a collab video series of like vlogs or wrap-ups after each of them picked a different Bookish award and read the nominees or shortlist from that award. And it's in a niche or genre that booktuber reads in, and kind of assessed whether or not they truly feel it's the best in that genre or what it's gauging. And I specifically want to highlight Angela from Literature Science Alliance because she picked the Ursula K. Le Guin Awards for this year. So I am very underread of those selections so far this year. I've read a couple, but very excited to see someone actually talking about the books. Many of them I've seen no one talk about. So that was great. As I mentioned up front, or not up front, but while I was talking about After the Dragons, there is another book from the same press, A Boreality, that's in this year's nominee. So it was great to see someone talking about that because, again, I've seen nobody reading that so far. And so that gave me an assessment a bit of which ones I want to prioritize. I do want to read all of the nominees myself as well, but which ones I want to get to sooner rather than later. So fabulous collab. I really enjoyed the ones I've watched so far. I haven't quite gotten through all of them. I think I've gotten through over half though, and enjoyed all of them. People are critical within their own genre, and to see this wider and people being critical across the board pretty much of whether or not these awards actually do what they set out to. So I greatly enjoyed that. So definitely check out that collab and especially Angela's video. So that is it for me today. Thank you so very much for watching.